Okay, well, thank you all again for coming, and everybody on YouTube that joins us. The numbers keep increasing, people watching on YouTube, so that's very encouraging. Thank you very much for that. And if anybody has questions or comments, you can reach us at Dharma Practice Study at gmail.com. So if there's anything you need, people on YouTube need books or anything like that, or to schedule, you can contact us, or you can go to our website, buddhapracticestudy.com, and there's a text tab, and you can download text from that location there, as well as on the audio tab. There's the recitation of the mantras of the prayers, so you can hear the monks doing that. So it's a good website. Thank Bernie for doing that. He maintains the website for us. So thank you. So let's get started, if you don't mind. We'll start with the altruistic motivation in our prayer book, page 1. So we recite twice in English, once in Tibet, where it's indicated as 3 times. All mother sentient beings, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and omniscience. May they experience happiness, be separated from suffering, and swiftly I will establish them in the state of unsurpassed, perfect, complete, and precious Buddhahood. All mother sentient beings, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and omniscience. May they experience happiness, be separated from suffering, and swiftly I will establish them in the state of unsurpassed, perfect, complete, and precious Buddhahood. Dakla dang war je pe dra no par je pe geg. Tarpa dang tam shaken pe bar du jo par je pa tam shaki so je pe. Manam kadam yam pe sem chen tam she de wa dang den. Dug now dang drel nur du la na me pa yang dag par zog pe zhang ju brin po she to pa ja. Thus, until I achieve enlightenment, I perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. Until death, I perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. From now until this time tomorrow, I perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. Deshe du sang ma ge gi bar du lu na gi sam ge wa la ko. Ma she bar du lu na gi sam ge wa la ko. Du de ring ne song te ni ma sang ta sam gi bar du lu na gi sam ge wa la ko. We take refuge in the kind root Lama and lineage Lamas. We take refuge in the deities of the mandalas of the Yidams. We take refuge in all the exalted Buddhas. We take refuge in the perfect Dharma. We take refuge in the excellent order of the Sanghas. We take refuge in all the noble Dakas, Dakinis, and Dharma guardians, possessors of the eye of wisdom. We take refuge in the kind root Lama and lineage Lamas. We take refuge in the deities of the mandalas of the Yidams. We take refuge in all the exalted Buddhas. We take refuge in the perfect Dharma. We take refuge in the excellent order of the Sanghas. We take refuge in all the noble Dakas, Dakinis, and Dharma guardians, possessors of the eye of wisdom. Transcend sawa dangur pa je pe pal dan lama dam pa nam la kyab su chi o. Yidam kil gorgi la sok nam la kyab su chi o. Sangye chom den de nam la kyab su chi o. Dampe cho nam la kyab su chi o. Pape ge du nam la kyab su chi o. Pawo ka jo cho kyung song me song ye she gi chang dang dem ba nam la kyab su chi o. Until I attain the heart of enlightenment, I take refuge in all the Buddhas. I take refuge in the Dharma, and likewise in the assembly of the Bodhisattvas. As the previous Buddhas embraced the enlightened mind and progressed on the Bodhisattva's path, I too, for the benefit of all sentient beings, give birth to bodhicitta and apply myself to accomplish the stages of the path. Until I attain the heart of enlightenment, I take refuge in all the Buddhas. I take refuge in the Dharma, and likewise in the assembly of the Bodhisattvas. As the previous Buddhas embraced the enlightened mind and progressed on the Bodhisattva's path, I too, for the benefit of all sentient beings, give birth to bodhicitta and apply myself to accomplish the stages of the path. Shangshu Ning Po Chi Ki Bar Sangye Nam La Kyab Su Chi Chodang Shangshu Senpai Yi So Klang De Shin Kyab Su Chi Jitar Nongki De Sheg Yi Shangju Tugni Ke Padang Shangju Sempe La Pala De Dagrim Shin E Patar De Shin Dro La Pandandu Shangju Semni Ke Gishing De Shindu Ni La Pala Rimpa Shindu La Pa Ji O. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent, I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent, I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. Sangye Chodang Soki Chonam La Shangju Badu Dagni Kapsu Chi Dagi Jin Soki Pe Sonam Gi Drola Panshir Sangye Ju Pasho. May all mother sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. May all mother sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. Manam kadam yam pesem chantam she dewa dang dewe gudang dempar jorchi. Dug now dang danal gi gudang drawar jorchi. Dug now me pe dewa dang mi drawar jorchi. Ne ring jak dang ni dang drawe, dang namla ne pa chi. Om Vajrasattva Samaya, help to protect my vow, to purify myself. May you remain firm with me. Grant me the complete satisfaction. Grow with me, be loving towards me. Grant me the attainments to master the powers beyond body and nature. Show me all the deeds of body, speech, and mind. Make my mind heart good, virtuous, and auspicious. Revel in the bliss of the four joys, O Blessed One, who embodies the essence within me. Do not abandon me. Grant me the realization of the indestructible nature. Make me one with you. Thus I signify my unity with non-duality. Ah. Om Vajrasattva Samaya Manupalaya Vajrasattva Tenopa Dristadredo Me Bhava Suto Kayo Me Bhava Supo Kayo Me Bhava Anuraktu Me Bhava Sara Siddhi Me Prayatsa Sara Karma Sutsa Me Sitsan Chiya Kuru Hong Ha 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 Ho Bhagavan Saratada Gata Bajra Mame Munsa Bajri Bhava Mahasamaya Satvaha Om Bajra Sattva Samaya Manupalaya Bajra Sattva Tanopa Drista Dredo Me Bhava Suto Kayo Me Bhava Supo Kayo Me Bhava Anuraktu Me Bhava Sara Siddhi Me Prayatsa Sara Karma Sutsa Me Sitsan Triya Kuru Hong Ha 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 ho Bhagavan Saratada Gata Bajra Mame Munsa Bajri Bhava Mahasamaya Satvaha Om Bajra Sattva Samaya Manupalaya Bajra Sattva Tenopa Dristadredo Me Bhava Suto Kayo Me Bhava Supo Kayo Me Bhava Anuraktu Me Bhava Sara Siddhi Me Prayatsa Sara Karma Sutsa Me Sitsan Chiya Kuru Hong Ha 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 ho Bhagavan Saratada Gata Bajra Mame Munsa Bajri Bhava Mahasamaya Sattva Ha. Likewise be extinguished. Extinguish all enemies to my purpose. Whatever evil forces are in me, be defeated. Do this so that when I am victorious, all pure radiance melts into me, completely purified. Take all this knowledge, food, and drink peacefully, enjoy it, and be satisfied, so that all obstacles may be destroyed. Be liberated from all obstacles, all general obstacles. Maras are defeated by this gesture of the Buddha. By reciting this mantra, may all the Maras be purified. As a result, may all the Maras be defeated. Okay, thank you all very much for joining. Does anybody have any comments or questions? Anything you'd like to discuss before we get started? Anything about the past sessions that we've had or anything you'd like to be doing? Yes, Gunga.
So I was wondering, is it okay to work on the prostrations for the Nundro during the week but only do the full practice on the weekend? I'm trying to incorporate it into my everyday life, but I don't have the time to do the full practice. I mean, I have time to do some prostrations during the week and the full practice on like Saturday, but I can't do the whole thing, every day.
Well, what I would suggest would be to do the short refuge prayer and the four immeasurable for measurable prayer, to do those prayers to set your mind on what it is that you're doing, your motivation. And then it wouldn't take very long for you to go through the first 3 pages or something like that with the prostrations, to recite that. Let me see if I got the book right here. It's important to have the right mindset. Is really where I'm going with this. Just doing the prostrations is one thing, but being able to recite it with the heartfelt intention is the second part. So I'm looking at the book now. So if we did page 9 and 10, and then we did if we did 9 and 10 and 11, and then if you didn't have time to do the 4 thoughts to turn the mind to the Dharma.
Well, part of that practice I do in the morning. Like I'm doing the Deity Yoga visualization with Shakyamuni Buddha. I do that every morning. I spend an hour on that.
Okay. Well, then that's good. Then when do the prostrations come? Right after you do that?
No, end of the day.
Later in the day.
Very end of the day.
I see. Well, then, yes. So then you would want to restate those opening prayers, the short refuge prayer and the 4 thoughts to turn the mind to the Dharma. And then in this particular case, I think what you can do is go to actually, if you go to in the book, if you go to the practice where it says page 25, and you start there and you recite page 25, 26, 27, 28, and 29, and then you start doing the prostrations. Are you reciting the prayer with the prostrations?
In English, I'm still memorizing. I have
That's
it memorized
fine.
in English, but not in Tibetan.
All right, well, that's fine. And I would do that. It's only going to take a couple of minutes to recite those pages. But
Mm-hmm.
and then and because in those pages, you've got the refuge prayer on page 28. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be the main thing. So I think that would be very good. And then go ahead and start doing the prostrations, and then do a dedication at the end of the prostrations.
So page 24 through 28.
28, 29, and 30. 30, 31.
Which page should I start at?
I think you should start on page 25.
Okay. So
And
25 through 31.
so if this is based on the idea that you're doing this on the weekdays, but then on the weekend you're doing a full practice, is that what it is? Or some other days you're doing?
On Saturday I can do in the morning. I have the couple hours. I can do the full practice with you. I just have a recording. Your recording, I just do it with one of the recordings.
Yeah.
The last recording.
Well, I think establishing that you're trying to get into the groove, and you're you're working on the Tibetan recitation of the prayer, the long refuge prayer. So I think that being able to do this, to be able to get into that groove, would be very good. It's not going to be harmful. And then I think what happens is you begin to say, "Oh, I've been taking these shortcuts, but now I want to do it the whole way." From my experience, personal, and talking to other people, this is the way it goes. We start getting into it the best way we can, but then it gives way to, let me do it the very best way I can do it. So I think it's fine. And if you're keeping track of the number of prostrations that you do, that's a good thing. So if you got a calendar or someplace you can put in however many you're doing each day. Okay. But to do the dedication at the end is very important as well. So if you do a short dedication or you do a longer dedication,
The
either
dedication
one.
prayer on page 43, that'd be fine.
Yeah, that's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
But then you're doing the long, you're doing those long prayer, the long mantras, the increasing mantras. If you're doing those on Saturday, then that's good.
Okay.
Okay. Alex has his hand up. Alex, what are you thinking?
Yeah, thank you for noticing. We're deciding today, I realize I don't quite grasp when we recite the deity of the mandala of the yidams, and I thought yidam is the deity, and when we say the deity of mandala of yidams, I don't know if there's any special interpretation of that besides just kind of like poetic word combination.
Well, a yidam is a deity. There's many, many deities, and a yidam is a particular deity that is like your personal deity that you are working with. You are seeing the Dharma, you're seeing your practice through the lens, if you will, through the eyes of that particular yidam deity. So they're like a teacher to you. They're like a mentor to you.
So Yidam is the chosen deity that particularly have affinity to a particular person.
Of a particular deity, not a person. That might be your root guru or something like that. But the Yidam would be would be like Shakasamvara, would be like Medicine Buddha, would be like Green Tara, and this is the deity that you're doing most often. You're the deity practice that you're doing most often, and you're seeing your absorption into the lineage, into what you do through that particular deity.
Oh, okay.
So like Medicine Buddha, Medicine Buddha is the healing Buddha. So everything that you're doing, everything you're thinking of in terms of healing other beings and healing yourself. If it was Green Tara, you might think of in terms of protection, that you're offering protection for all sentient beings and for yourself. You're offering protection. If it was Shen Rezig, it would be compassion, that you're developing compassion for all beings and for yourself. It's like your main focus that you're moving through, and you're learning, about what Buddha nature is through that Yidam deity.
Right. So for one person, that Yidam may be one deity, and for the other person, that Yidam could be a different deity.
For different people, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And you can change, your Yidam deity, but I think it's really good to be able to stay with a Yidam deity for some length of time.
Yeah.
It's difficult to put a time frame on that, but whether it's 6 months or a year or 2 years or 5 years, but to stay with that deity for quite some time. It's like signing up and taking classes with a particular teacher. You want to go through the whole experience with that teacher before you change and go to another teacher.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And another thing I have on recitation, I'm trying to figure out like when there is letter G, like sometimes we pronounce it G and sometimes like as G, and I wonder if there is any hint to how is it supposed to pronounce, or is it just by memory you have to remember how each word.
It is it's a dialect. One monk from one part of Tibet might pronounce it G, another one might pronounce it Gi, and it really depends on where they come from, what part of Tibet they come from. So to say that there's an absolute proper way to say it, recite it, I can't say that. I've asked lamas the same question before, and that's the answer I always get.
Okay. No, I'm
So,
not so confused.
yes. So
That's my.
yes. It's like a very obvious one is here in America, if you talk to somebody that's from the United States, they'll say the word out or about. But then if you ask somebody from Canada, and they'll say it a slightly different way, out or about. They have a slightly different way of pronouncing it.
It's like schedule and schedule.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, good questions. Thank you very much. It means a lot because it means you're paying attention to what you're doing, and you're trying to assimilate into the practices. That's really good. Okay, so later on, Pete Tashi is likely to join us around 8 o'clock or so. So I'm going to leave some time at the end of our session so that he can give a little bit of his autobiography, so we can understand a little bit more about what he's been doing and so on. So I'm saving some time for that. But to get started, we're going to continue where we left off on to chapter 3 of the play in full, the Lalitavistara Sutra. But before, I want to have a little discussion, an open discussion about it, and because reading this is in some way like reading an ancient story, like the Bible or the Dhammapada or the Hindu texts and so on, that have these stories, these life stories about these beings 1,000, 2,000 years ago or something like that. And I wonder sometimes, well, how much of this is fact? How much of this that actually happened? How much of it has been, a story that has been, changed over generations and so on? So, the question of whether it's like a myth, whether there's a mythology about it, or whether there's mysteries about it. Some of these things leave mysteries and leave these things as mysteries, that you have to experience these things in a way that there's this power that is greater than we are and not able to grasp these things. So the myths to me are like histories. They're like stories, and I pay attention to them all. I think they're all important, but I'm always ready to change. I'm always ready to look at it from another point of view, from another story, from another storyteller. There might be some other aspect about it. Doing the sutras to me is like going back to the most reliable of these stories. But there's still some differences between the stories within the sutras, because the sutras were being taught over a period of about 30 years, 50 years. He started teaching when he was in the middle 30s, and he didn't pass away until into his 80s. So for 50 years or so, he's telling, giving these teachings and so on. So depending on the circumstances, the stories change a little bit. So the reason I'm bringing this up, because I don't want anybody to feel as though, oh, well, we're hearing it this way, but I've heard it this way before. Which way is the correct way? So to me, it's a matter of keeping your mind open and knowing that these stories are very, very old, and they do get changed. They do get interpreted from one language to another and so on. So there's lots of room for differences and so on. So we shouldn't hold on to them so tight that we hang on to every single word and every single meaning of a particular word or phrase. So the myths are like a history, but but we can't hold on to them as being like absolute. This is part of our relative understanding of things. This is part of impermanence. This is part of the emptiness of being a human being, and so on. An analogy for this might be, and myths and these kinds of things are very important to mankind, to humans. I was thinking about it and thinking, well, back in the year dot, they were sitting around the campfires, and the hunter gatherers, were out there, wearing, clothing from the animals that they killed, recently, and so on. And they're basically like, ancient cave people or something like that. And with whatever language they have, they're telling stories to each other. And the stories change over a period of time, and somebody passes away and somebody picks up the story and starts telling it a different way. So it starts off, with these very basic ways, very fundamental ways of entertaining the children, entertaining each other, and so on like that. So, but then it progresses a little bit as human beings have gotten more sophisticated, and it's turned into like fables. It's turned into bedtime stories that we tell our kids, that maybe our parents told us, and so on like that. And we hear these stories, but then, they tell it one way from what do they call it? The golden books or something, where these, kids' books when I was a kid. But then you find that there's older versions of that, or more original versions of that, and the stories are much deeper, much rougher, and so on. So it's part of human beings' way of learning, connecting with the past. Tell me about my family. My mother would tell us about, her brothers and sisters, that where they lived in England and so on. We didn't know them, but she would go through this, and maybe the same thing happened with you. So this storytelling is an important part of learning who we are as human beings, and what our story has been collectively, and so on. Does anybody have any comment about this? What would you like to say about that? I was hoping that Matt was going to be here, because I wanted to hear if there's a psychology about this. Does anybody have an opinion about this? Gunga?
Yeah, I've been thinking about these stories, and especially since we've been talking about this new sutra, and I've been reading the Lalitavistara Sutra for a while. And I was thinking, the image that came to my mind was like walking on a beach. And when you're walking, you're down there on the beach, so you're down there with the story. And when you're on the sand, you're kind of looking at the story, and you're sort of like, well, okay, I believe that happened. And that just seemed like a bunch of stuff somebody added on. That seemed like make-believe. Those seemed like mythology. Those seemed kind of stories like that. I mean, they're kind of dismissive of it. But as you kind of walk into the water, and you feel the temperature and things like that, kind of like getting into the story, you start to think about, how these ideas came about, like, oh, why did they think this? What does this mean symbolically? What are they talking about when they talk about these millions of Buddhas, as many as atoms in the earth? What could that have? What kind of deeper meaning could that be? Maybe, you kind of try and intellectualize an understanding for it. But at some point you just dive in and you start swimming away from shore, and you just kind of immerse yourself in the story. And you just let all that other intellectualizing just go away. And I think that's really the kind of investment that some of these things like the Lalitavistara Sutra are requiring of you. You just have to sort of put that intellectual mind, and just, that's not appropriate for this type of investigation. So thank you.
Thank you. Very good. Would somebody else like to comment? I'd like to hear from Bernie. I like to hear from Zara too, because Azar is very active with people, with kids, and Faiza's online with us tonight. So I know she works with kids too. And how does this storytelling, how does this work in your connection with kids? Bernie, you turned your microphone on.
Well, since you mentioned my name, I thought I would say something. Well, the different stories in the sutras about the Buddha's life, uh, it's hard to say to what extent they're accurate historically, but they're there to teach lessons. They're there to teach lessons, and we should appreciate them more as a lesson on cultivating certain good qualities than to try to think of them as historically accurate. Obviously, when you come to Mahayana sutras, they just they pile on the grandiose stuff. So they exaggerate things. Let's just put it this way. So if you're in front of a palace, the palace has 32,000 stories, That's obvious literary exaggeration and not meant to be taken literally. And I don't think people took it literally even back then. But the point is they're teaching a lesson, and the significance is to understand the lesson that they're teaching. And part of that lesson is the world isn't the world as we see it with our senses right now. If I can say I learned anything from drugs, it's that the eyes aren't just windows out on the world. We create the reality that we live in with our mind. And it's not just the mind is just not a passive observer of the world. And when you change your mind, your reality will change as well. So I'll just leave it at that. Okay.
Very good. Thank you for that. Yes, Gary.
Listening to what Bernie said, and one phrase that I seem to come across in my reading consistently is that we are our thoughts. And when he suggests that we create the world around us, we do that. We do that, or at least the world as it exists in our mind. And one thing that has happened to me very slowly, but it has happened to me, is I become more of a watcher than a doer. It's not that I don't participate in things and make contributions. That's not what, but I become more of an observer, which would have been good for me a half a century ago, because I'm much better at observing than I am at doing, I think. And as I watch the storm that is around all of us, withdrawing from that and living in my mind and exploring my thoughts helps me to cope with and understand what's going on around me, even though I can't change very much of it.
Very good. Thank you. Based on, what we've all said, we see certain things, right? But we see things in a certain spectrum. But we also know that there are things that are happening beyond that spectrum that we recognize things and are able to process. I mean, the space telescopes are just one small example of that. That they're looking at the new one is looking at stuff in infrared. We don't see that. It's completely invisible to us. We don't recognize that. But yet there's this whole universe, or whatever we want to call it, that's available to us in the infrared. So to me, that speaks of the idea of dimensions, that we're looking at things in these three dimensions. And in this particular spectrum, this vibrational spectrum of sound and of sight and so on like that. But there's a whole lot of other stuff that's going on that we just don't know. You know, the space that's in between us. If we were sitting here in a room together, it would seem like there's just a space between us. But there could be bodies of different dimensions that are in that space that we don't recognize. They can be small, they could be huge. So I look at these, a lot of these spiritual references and so on as possibilities of what that might be. Zara, I was asking you, are you available for a comment?
Hey, Lance, I'm here. I'm just listening to everybody. I think your original question was about storytelling.
Yeah.
I don't yeah, so storytelling as as a way to pass down information is highly valuable and contextually appropriate given everything we're going on. So relative to like the sutras and the reading we're doing for our spiritual journey, I think it's just like everything else. It's an oral history that's passed down, and the wisdom that's just passed down. So yeah, there's value in storytelling just in general. And I know Matt's not here tonight, but storytelling has sort of emerged or re-emerged in sort of behavioral health and behavioral psychology as a way to connect. So like I'm seeing at professional development activities, they have speakers coming to talk about the power of storytelling and presenting information. So even from like a professional scope, I've seen it reemerge in the last couple of years at conferences as something that's valuable, important to society, just, you know, even in professional circuits.
So it's developing a critical thinking into the listeners that goes beyond the literal meaning of the stories or the text of the stories. It's developing another critical insight into the dynamic of being a human being.
So from a behavioral health perspective, yeah, like it provides context. There's a richness, like even from like a scientific observation, like measurements, like the narrative itself has a level of quality, right, and substance that like just from the type of work I do where everything can be very objective, right, where you can take away the human from like, okay, your scale weight is this, your blood pressure is this, but tell me your story, right? What is your day-to-day? So there's a richness and element to that that brings it a whole nother level of meaning, like you said, like another dimension of explaining the journey, right? That's lost when you're just looking at something objectively or numerically. Or strictly analytically.
Do you have an opinion about at what age, you know, that critical thinking begins to?
Age eight.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the brain is constantly absorbing, like I think I call it theta. It's just the child's mind is unencumbered by convention. It's just looking around like what's going on, like, you know, like the survival mind. It's absorbing everything. And I think we have research that even shows that talks about how language acquisition, like multiple languages after a certain age, that like the brain is becomes so patterned. Like you talked about thoughts. So I think someone had mentioned thoughts, maybe Gary. The way we think and the things that we're thinking about before age 8 have a profound impact on how we're thinking as adults. So the young mind is so malleable, and it's trying to keep that mind as an adult, right? That's unconditioned and all the garbage from other people that gets dumped on after age 8, that patterns, and it can be toxic or non-toxic, depends, but age 8 lands.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. That was very good.
You're welcome.
Somebody had turned their microphone on before and wanted to say something, and I kind of cut them off.
Lance, I think it was me.
Yes, Alex.
Well, for me, like as a scientist, sometimes very interesting to read certain passages because on one hand, they're filled with a lot of factual things, like the names of the people that were present of the Buddha, or the names of the gods that were there, you know. But then on the other hand, um, uh, there's also a lot of things. Well, and these factual things, they don't have to be there, but they're there. So it gives sort of legitimacy to the story on one hand. But on the other hand, there are some embellishments, so to speak, and hyperbolas that don't have to be there, but they're still there. And also, like, like talking about heavenly realm, right? Heavenly realm, and it has some things that, you know, exist only in certain parts of our world, of you know, earthly world, and they're there, you know, but some of the good things that we know here exist in America are not there. There's no smartphone there. or, so or some interesting animals that we no penguins, you know. uh, I'm just saying that uh, I think we have to look at this from two. We want. I see values in two perspectives. Like on the one hand, it gives you some facts that you want to believe. You want to listen to the story because it sounds true. There is facts there, and it's good to know those facts. But on the other hand, the story also makes certain things in poetic language that also captures our imagination and even develops our imagination, and that also keeps our attention. But in between, there is also a little bit of boring stuff, but I think that's also very valuable stuff to absorb as we go through the story. Like, for example, what are the things that the Buddha had to do to become a Buddha, right? What things he had to develop, what qualities he had to develop, and so on and so forth, and how many different repetitions, how many different times he had to do those things and all that. That's sort of boring stuff, but at the same time, this is something that also need to be kind of engraved in our subconscious, that this path is not done one day. You know, there are a lot of work to be done, really. And this poetic language, it helps us to go through the story, really. You know, that's value I take from that.
Very good. I think, you know, there's space in the story for you to be able to color it in yourself. You know, a good story leaves that in there. You know, if there's too much detail, if there's artwork and so on all associated with it, you know, it starts focusing, and you know, your creativity of being able to adapt it to your situation gets diminished the more stuff there is. And it's healthy to leave a degree of openness about it so that you can paint it in your own with your own color palette, etc. All right.
Yes,
Thank you.
this is a good point. Thank you. This is another good point.
Well, thank you all for your comments, and we could probably talk all night about this, but I'd like to get into chapter 3 of the play in full, the purity of the family. So there is a lot of minutia of some detail in here, and we're not going to be able to cover it, you know, and it's certainly not in this meeting, and but it bears, you know, reading on our own, and then reading it on your own, then through this discussion we're having to be able to say, well, what is it that I can really, you know, process to be able to understand what's being said here? What is, you know, talking about all this phantasmical kind of picture of things and so on. What's the basic lessons, the fundamental story I'm trying to understand here? So to get us in the mode of being able to do that, I want to read a little bit of this, or I want to have this read and then discuss it as we go. So would somebody like to volunteer to read this 3.1, 3.2, 3.3 and get through that? And then I'd like to discuss it because there's some points there that need to be explained and so on. So would somebody like to be the reader?
Well, Lance, since I just accidentally turned to 3.1,
Yes.
completely randomly, perhaps that's karma and I should, if that's all right with you.
All right, I'll accept that. All right.
Chapter 3, the purity of the family. Monks, in this way, the Bodhisattva was exhorted. The time for the Dharma had come. Emerging from that great celestial palace, the Bodhisattva went to the great Dharmakaya palace, where he taught the Dharma, the gods in the heaven of joy. In the palace, he seated himself upon a lion throne, known as Sublime Dharma. He was joined in the palace by a group of gods, whose good fortune equaled that of the Bodhisattva, and who had entered the same vehicle. Bodhisattvas with similar conduct to the Bodhisattva gathered from throughout the 10 directions. Retinues with equally pure intentions accompanied the gods, without the assembly of divine maidens, and even without ordinary gods. Altogether, a retinue of 680 million entered the palace, each sitting on a lion throne according to rank. The Bodhisattva then said, "Monks, in 12 years the Bodhisattva shall enter the womb of his mother. At that time, the gods from the pure realms ventured to Jambudvipa. Hiding their divine forms, they took on the guise of priests and taught the Vedas to other priests. They made it known that one who entered the womb in this manner would be a great being possessed of 32 marks. Someone with such marks would become one of two things. There would be no third option, they said. If such an individual were to live as a householder, he would become a universal monarch with a fourfold army. He would become a conqueror, a righteous Dharma king. Such a king would have the 7 treasures, the precious wheel, the precious elephant, the precious horse, the precious jewel, the precious wife, the precious steward, and the precious minister." Shall I continue?
Yeah, please.
How is it that a universal monarch comes to possess the precious wheel? Such a wheel can only belong to a king who has been properly consecrated by sprinkling his head. On the 15th day of the lunar month, while observing a Pasad fast, the king will first wash his head and then go to the top terrace of the palace, surrounded by the women of the female quarters. Then a precise divine wheel with 1,000 spokes will appear from the east, as high as 7 tala trees. The wheel, which is not made by a smith, is round with a central hub and made entirely of gold. This precious divine wheel will now belong to the king, who is appointed to the highest rank of the ruling class. As he sees it, he will think to himself, "I have heard that if a precious divine wheel appears from the east when a king, who has been appointed to the highest rank of the ruling class, ascends to the top floor of the palace, surrounded by a gathering of women, while observing a Pasada fast on the 15th day of the lunar month, then he shall become a universal monarch. Since I can now clearly perceive this precious divine wheel, I must certainly be a universal monarch."
Very good. Thank you. Yeah, so
welcome.
that was up to 3.4, right?
Correct.
Okay, good. All right, so let's go back and use the books that we have and be able to pick this apart a little bit and give a little bit of explanation as we go. So we're looking at this story, this phantasmical story of millions of beings at the palace and all this. So this is all part of that myth that we've been talking about. And we shouldn't get lost in those kinds of numbers. But it becomes very important to be able to look at what is being said here in the paragraph. It says, "At that time, the gods from the pure realms venture to Zemvupipa, hiding their divine forms. So Zemvupipa is the mythical continent on which we live. There's other continents. There's actually 4 continents. So without going into a whole lot of detail, this continent is it's called the Rose Apple continent. Zemvupipa means rose apple. And so it's got all the things that we need. It's got all the food that we need. It's got the peacefulness that we need. It's got the animals that we need. Everything that we need as human beings is here. The other continents get very extreme in different ways. So we're going to come to them in a few paragraphs or so. We can talk about them. But this Zemvupipa is like this beautiful earth that we live on. So you can look it up. I think Zemvupipa might be in the glossary. JAM. Am I correct? Yeah. G271. So it gives a little bit more detail here. And I exhort you to use the glossary and look it up and see what it means. And basically what I just said is incorporated in the paragraph or so for Zemvupipa in the glossary. So here are these beings, these supernatural beings, if I can use that word, these supernatural beings that now kind of manifest as something that we can understand as being priests, and those who taught the teachings, the Vedas. This is coming from the Hindu tradition now. So the Vedas were the teachings of the Hindu, the pantheon of the gods and the story that came from that. So out of that is coming the Buddhism, is coming out of that. So then talking about those who entered the womb, that we're going through this natural progression of being born as a human being, and that there would be this great being with the 32 marks. So the 32 marks, last time I mentioned that here in the Jewel Ornament of Liberation are the 32 marks. So it's things like physical marks, like he's got long eyebrows, he's got a hair that comes down between his eyes on his nose, and he's got his fingers and his hands and his feet and his toes all are kind of a little bit webbed. There's all these physical characteristics. He's got broad feet, he doesn't have narrow feet, and he's very gorgeous. He's got all these characteristics, these 32 characteristics and so on. So this is denoting, what this great divine being would be. So it says, carry on here, it says in quotes, someone with such marks will become one of 2 things. There would be no third option. So in this first part of the description, it's only talking about one part. It's talking about the ordinary part. This is the story of the Buddha. And if you remember the story of the Buddha, when he was born and as an infant, and he was brought back to the palace, his father's, the king's palace, and the king requested that there be some wise men that would come and give a divination of who this child was. And they agreed that this was going to be a magnificent child who is either going to be a great monarch, who was going to be a great leader of men in terms of the kingdom and so on, or he was going to be a leader of men in terms of a great spiritual being. So here we're looking at it from the point of view of that he's going to be a great monarch. He's going to be a great leader through the kingdom and so on. But there is this spiritual aspect to it. So it says there would be no third option. If such an individual were to be a householder, he would be a universal monarch. So let's define universal monarch. So go to the glossary, 692. So 692 gives an explanation of what a universal monarch is. Sorry. So 692, the term universal monarch denotes a just and pious king who rules over the universe according to the laws of Dharma. So this universe could be talked about as being a very localized kingdom, but more broadly as a universe, as all phenomenal nature, as all this that we, all part of the cosmos, or whatever parts of it we want to break it down to, certain solar systems or certain galaxies or some, however we want to divide that up. So the divine monarch is that, being able to do that, the laws of Dharma. Such a monarch is called a Chakravartin, because he wields a disc, a chakra that rolls the Vartana over continents. So it's like a big wheel that goes over continents. I mean, this is huge, you know, it's it moves through space and you know, extraordinary ways that we can only imagine. And worlds and world systems, bringing them under his power. A universal monarch is often considered the worldly political correlate of a Buddha. So a Buddha being a awakened spiritual one, but the Chakravartin, or the divine monarch, being one who is involved in the physical, being involved in the intellectual, and maybe having potential as being spiritual, but that's not completely realized. They are mainly involved with the physical and the intellectual, the divine monarch, who has this divine quality about them. So this is the divine monarch. So here it says the universal monarch with a fourfold army. So this fourfold army means many different ways in which it can move and so on. There's no definition for that here in the book. So we have to use my imagination a little bit and say that he would work in different ways. So I think that gets revealed as we go on a little bit further in the book. And then he would be a conqueror, a righteous Dharma king. Such a king would have the 7 treasures. So these treasures: the precious wheel, the precious elephant, the precious horse, the precious jewel, the precious wife, and the precious steward, and the precious minister. So the next part of the book, this chapter, goes through each one of these 7 treasures that the Chakravartin king has. And if you go to many of the shrines in many of the Dharma centers, like Dharma Surya, for instance, there are small statues of these 7 treasures. And there's a representation for them. And depending on the practice, the meaning of them. So I'm going to give you a short impression rather than going through and reading all this. You can read all this on your own. But just to give you an introduction to this, to be able to understand who this Chakravartin king is, this great king, this divine monarch is. He's got the divine wheel. And this divine wheel rolls over things and so on, is able to move in any direction he wishes to go. And this is the wheel we talk about, the turnings of the wheels and so on like that these wheels are these circular spiral patterns that human beings are are caught in. It's part of our natural way of dealing with things. We don't deal in things at their absolute. We experience them in cycles and so on. So the wheel is an illustration of that kind of cycle. And then we go through these activities of being able to engage with these different aspects as we're moving across them, of pacification, of enrichment, of magnetizing, bringing these things in, and of subduing. So this wheel is like the divine wheel, being able to hear this wheel, and then the practicality of making this how we move through Zampupipa. So he's got this divine wheel, and there's an interesting part about this on 3.3, section 3.3. It says that there's a how is that the universal monarch comes to possess the special wheel, precious wheel. Such a wheel can only belong to a king who has been properly consecrated by sprinkling his head on the 15th day of the lunar month. So this is like a baptism. This is like a ceremony. This is something that's like a rite of passage or something like that to anoint. In some books they would say, oh, to be anointed. He was anointed by those who were, the elders or whatever, designated as being, this great being. And then they kind of qualified to be able to recognize and to be able to use and practice this divine wheel. Does anybody have any questions or comments at this point?
I was wondering, so what is the are you familiar then with some of the more specific symbolisms of the Dharma wheel that when it's used on the shrine that you mentioned? You said there are different groups maybe have different ideas behind what that symbolizes.
Well, in Dharma it represents the Eightfold Path.
Right. But in this particular context, is it that representation of the Eightfold Path? I was wondering, since there's 7 of them, if they connect the 7 factors of awakening at all, especially since
no, it's more practical than that.
Okay.
So let's go into it, and then we can talk about it some more at the end. But you'll see it's more practical than that. So then the next one is so anyway, so at the end of 3.3, it says, then he shall become a universal monarch. Since I can now clearly perceive this precious divine wheel, I must certainly be a universal monarch. So this is the Bodhisattva, who is the Bodhisattva before becoming Buddha Shakyamuni. So he hasn't been born yet. So this is in that, in that pure land of the heaven, before he's even materialized as a human being. But all this potential, you see, is building up here. So he's recognizing this as himself. So then the next one, 3.4, so what I wanted to say, I know. So then the precious elephant is the precious elephant on 3.7, in the middle of that paragraph right there, it says, its magical powers enable it to fly through the sky and transform itself. This king of elephants is known as Bodhi. And Bodhi is Sanskrit for enlightenment. So I guess that's 2 ways of looking at it, is as enlightenment to be able to move through things. But the other thing, this elephant, from a practical point of view, would have been the way that in 2,600 years ago, that if they had to go from one place to another, if they had taking their entourage in this like parade of dignitaries and people and servants and so on like that, they'd be putting all the heavy stuff on the elephant to carry. Be like a moving truck. So it's moving, taking possessions, moving through things. The next one is the horse, is the steed. The horse. So the precious horse would be like that the king himself, that the queen, that the high dignitaries might be riding the horse, the steed. And they're fast, they can maneuver, they can do lots of things and so on. So from a practical point of view, they're being able to do that. From a spiritual point of view, they may be able to go through, leap through the air and go from one place to another very quickly and so on. So it's the wheel that is giving them ability to be able to recognize all that, but it's the practicality now of how we do that. So the horse would be, the steel would be the consciousness of catching up with what all these possibilities are, what it is that we're doing, understanding what we're doing, and so on. Then the next one is the precious jewel. The precious jewel here is expressed as a light-giving sun. It's like the sun that illuminates everything. This jewel that illuminates for us, that takes us from ignorance, from darkness, into illumination, into being able to see what it is that we're doing. So the jewel represents that enlightening factor to be able to recognize what it is that we're doing. The expediency of being able to be able to do this, to be able to see this, to be able to recognize this. The horse knows where it's going. The elephant knows where it's going. It could be led by the humans and so on. So it's all this interconnected with each other. Then the next one is the precious wife, or the queen. And she represents the sensuous aspect of being a human being. The connection, the partner, the spouse, the one who is there to be able to propagate, our lives and so on. And so she represents that sensuous aspect of our lives. And then the next one is the precious steward. The precious steward would be, here it's expressed as being an attendant who caters to material needs. So it would be like the attendant of the king who is making sure that they have all the things that they need and so on like that. Their clothing, their possessions, the animals all lined up. He's kind of like the minister in between the king and all the other things that have to happen to support the king. And then the next one is the precious minister itself, where it says this is like someone who has the army and is commissioned with the job of controlling the army for security and to be able to vanquish those. Yes, Tashi. Your microphone is muted.
Hi, do these pertain to the mandala offer, like doing the mandala with the different?
Not at this point. Not at this point. It is part of that, but not at this point.
Okay.
So we're on the third chapter of the. Okay. So what Tashi just said, because depending on the practice, this is another part of the way these things are put together. Depending on the practice, depending on the text that you're looking at, these things might have a contextual meaning in one way, in what situation, but then you put them into another situation, they have a slightly different meaning. So this is a case in point where the precious steward would be regarded as a minister. You know, the minister who's the interplay between the king and all the other agencies that are working for the king. But then here it says the precious minister is taking care of the army. That would be the general. And in the mandala offering, then it's a minister and it's a general. So there's a general who takes care of the armies, the security end of things, and so on. So it goes to the point that I was trying to make in the very beginning of this talk, was that sometimes you have to leave some room to open, you know, for interpretation and for, you know, putting into a certain context and so on. So we shouldn't try and get too finite too fast about any of the meaning of these things. Any comments or questions? And I know, you know, I tried to go over this quickly because I know, you know, we don't have a whole lot of time. We're not going to read all of this, but I'm encouraging you to read this with these thoughts that I'm just trying to introduce to you in mind. It'll make it more interesting and more relevant to what is going on here.
Oh, Kamadorji, I just wanted to say that in 3.5, in the second paragraph, they go through the 5 precepts. I thought that was, you know, something that was relevant.
Well, it's actually, yes, you're right. And I was just looking at the same thing with my notes here, and it's actually going through the 10 virtues and the 10 non-virtues, and also these 2 admonishments and cautions or warnings. So we're talking about on the page 3.5, with that paragraph at the bottom of the page, it says, replying the provincial kings, the king appointed to the highest rank of the ruling class will respond, and goes on with this discussion here. And it's saying, it says, you should do these things according to the Dharma, and not by what is not Dharma. So in other words, we should recognize what is the Dharma that is taught by the Buddha, and not by that which is conjectured or confused with other things and so on. And then it goes on to give more detail. It says, do not take the lives of living beings. Do not take what is not given, and do not engage in sexual misconduct. So those are the three virtues of the body, the 3 virtues of the body. Do not take the lives of beings, do not take what is not given, and do not engage in sexual misconduct. Then the next one is, you should refrain from telling lies. You should not sow discord. You should not speak harshly and talk frivolously. In other words, gossiping and so on. Those are the 4 virtues of the speech. And then the next group says, do not let your mind be overcome by covetousness, and not overcome by malice, and not overcome by misguided beliefs. So those are the 3 of the mind. Those are the 3 virtues of the mind. And then the next sentence says, do not befriend those who take life, or those with misguided beliefs. And then the next one says, should non-dharma arise in my dominion, do not applaud those who practice it. So here are two admonishments, two cautions for us how we should involve ourselves with other people. In other words, it's not just what we're doing, but we can be very easily influenced by those who are doing negative things, and we have to guard ourselves against that. So another way of looking at this, I think, is we're setting up a system of morality with the Chakravartin king. You know, it's not just a king who might be very barbarian and going around and laying waste, you know, to all that he can conquer and steal and take and everything, but he's creating a morality of that king who has these treasures and power to be able to use these treasures and so on. Is a divine monarch, one who is so. Are we the divine monarch? I think becomes the question. Are we qualified to become a bodhisattva? Are we qualified to become Buddha? You know, and if we have in the past done negative things, or if we're doing negative things, can we stop doing those things and make amends for those things and continue the rest of our life or other lives to come as the Chakravartin king? Dashi, Bernie, you have any comments about this?
No.
I have in the thought here
Yes.
that I think there is a lot of wisdom in this teaching, and in that, like, let's say if Dharma were to taught to a king, you know, normally, yeah, you don't tell what king what to do, right? You cannot tell the king, like, you must do this and must do that. But if there is a story like that creates an example of how the best king may behave, that's sort of a message to any kind of president or any kind of ruler, like what are the virtues to follow. So, and we don't know who could become a ruler. Anybody can become a ruler, hopefully, one of those lifetimes. But there is, I mean, I see that value in this story.
Yes. Thank you. So, Brendan, would you continue reading? Start on 3.13 and continue down for a little bit here, because
All right, 3.13. The universal monarch will also have 1,000 sons, brave, heroic, and supremely able in body. These sons will attain nothing but victory over the forces that oppose them. Without resorting to punishment or acts of violence, the king will rule with the Dharma, bringing peace and order to the entire vast kingdom that extends all the way to the oceans. If, however, he leaves his family behind and becomes a monk, he will become a Buddha, relinquishing the attachment of desire, and without relying on anyone else as a guide, he will become the teacher of gods and humans.
okay, so hold on right there. So this is the second part, you know, where it says that there's two ways that this Chakravartin king can go. You know, there's going to be this practical king who has this human life and has, you know, all these seven treasures and so on, living life as a king, or he can put all that aside, put all that down, and say, okay, I'm going to leave my family and become a monk. I'll become a Buddha. I'll become an awakened one. I will not need all these things. Relinquishing the attachment of desire and without relying on anyone else as a guide, he will become the teacher of gods and humans. So what this means is that he's become self-realized as a truth body himself, as the Dharmakaya. That he is that he can it's more than just relying on it. In the beginning, it might be a reliance, but after a bit, you become completely absorbed with that. And there's no question that that you have become awakened and aware and are able to maintain that. So it's the transformation of an ordinary human being, although he may be a universal monarch, now into a Buddha, a living Buddha. So, Brendan, will you continue page 314, please?
With these words, the gods inspired the priests to recite the Vedas. In a similar manner, other gods arrived in Jambudvipa to exhort the solitary Buddhas. Noble ones, they said, give up this Buddha realm in 12 years' time. The Bodhisattva will enter the womb of his mother. Monks at that time, there was a solitary Buddha named Matanga, who dwelt on Mount Golangulapara Vartana in the city of Raj Agrava. Hearing the exhortation of the gods, he became as still as mud, resting upon a boulder, then rose up into the sky to the height of 7 tala trees. Merging with the fire element like a torch, he passed into nirvana. His bile and phlegm, ligaments and bones, and flesh and blood were completely consumed by fire, leaving nothing but a few relics on the ground. Even today, they are known as the footprints of the sage.
Continue.
Monks at this same time, 500 solitary Buddhas were assembled in a deer park outside Varanasi. They too heard the exhortation of the gods, rose up into the sky to the height of 7 tala trees, and turning into fire, passed into nirvana like a torch. Their bile and phlegm, ligaments and bones and flesh and blood were completely consumed by fire. Nothing was left behind, save a few relics that fell to the ground. From this point on, the area came to be known as Rasipatana, or the Hill of the Fallen Sages. The area also came to be known as Mrgadava, or the Deer Park, since deer frolicked there without fear.
Okay. So here it's making a distinction. First, it's talking about the Pratyeka Buddhas, the solitary realizers, the solitary Buddhas. So if you remember back in our conversations, in chapter 1 of the Jewel Ornamental Liberation, and when we talked about the 5 families of Buddha, that it was the Pratyeka Buddhas who were these arrogant beings who became self-absorbed with their enlightenment. And they were selfishly engaging in enlightenment for themselves, not for the benefit of others. And so here it's making the point that when these Pratyeka Buddhas were able to dissolve into this fire element, their remnants that were left behind, their bile, ligaments, bones, flesh, and blood, were all consumed by the fire. It was all consumed by the fire, and nothing but a few relics on the ground. And so that this was called the footprints of the sage. And then the next one, where the 500 solitary Buddhas were assembled at Deer Park, and they went through basically the same process. And then that became called the Hill of the Fallen Sages, and that's listed in the glossary 259. And that became known as Deer Park. And Deer Park, or Sarnath, is where the Buddha first turned the wheel of Dharma. After he had attained enlightenment and he walked for 49 days and he got to the outskirts of Varanasi, went to Deer Park and had his five disciples sit in front of him, and he gave them the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, which was the Four Noble Truths. So both of these, the Pratyeka Buddha had purified himself, and these 500 solitary Buddhas were further purified. Did I miss something on this? Did Bernie, Pete, do you have anything to add to this?
What's the I missed the beginning. What's the context of the this particular, how did it start, the chapter?
Okay, I think what needs to be said that isn't said explicitly here is that Pratyeka Buddhas cannot live during the same time period as a fully enlightened Buddha. And that is why they're being asked to enter nirvana, because the tradition was that a Pratyeka Buddha arises during a period during which there is no Buddha, fully enlightened Buddha. And that's why we have them being urged by the gods here to enter nirvana. That's the only thing I could really add. I really don't know much about Pratyeka Buddhas, so
That's
I
because
really
they're
can't
hard
say
to
much.
find.
What?
They're hard to
There-
find. They're
there-
hiding out.
Well, there aren't any around now, supposedly, because they can't exist during the period of time during when the Buddha's teaching still survives. So, because if they encountered the Buddha's teachings, they would either become arhats or bodhisattvas. It's only during a period of time when there is no Buddha that you can have a Pratyeka Buddha.
Oh,
So-
wow. Oh.
So I see these as the same. The result is the same. You know, regardless of where they were, you know, they started off, the Pratyeka Buddhas started off as Pratyeka Buddhas, and that, you know, they got to that level, but they were able to purify themselves and wind up in nirvana, what we would call nirvana. And so these 500 solitary Buddhas were also able to do that. And that there's to me, it means there's a path forward for both of them.
Well, yes, in Mahayana Buddhism, it says that all beings, even arhats and Pratyeka Buddhas, will eventually become fully enlightened Buddhas. So, but after a time they spend in nirvana, personal nirvana, they wake back up and then they strive to become a Buddha, and they actually do that very quickly. So that's the tradition, at least.
Okay. Well, it's an interesting part. I'm going to mark this down, and I'm going to go back to the introduction part and read this and look at this again. You know, and that's, again, the point of all this is I'm certainly not an expert in this. Nobody here is, but yet it does speak to us, and we need to kind of, you know, pull it out. We need to contemplate this. We need to meditate on this. We need to apply this to our real life experience and so on. It's not read once and forget. It's, you know, it's speaking to us in ways that we need to be able to bring into a practice, make a practice. So I think that's an important part. It's an important part for me. All right. Well, we've come to a part where I think we need to stop, so that we wanted to ask Tashi
Yeah.
if you would spend a few minutes giving your biography,
Oh, okay. Yeah,
autobiography, not your
sure.
epitaph, just a biography.
Right. Not a saga.
We'll write it down for the epitaph.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I was as a kid, I was interested in religion and spiritual things, but I didn't know much about it. And then I was raised Catholic. I was an altar boy and so forth, and went to a born again church for a year and a half when I was a teenager, and felt that I wanted a kind of a deeper religious experience, something that was more experiential and a little more guidance. But I didn't know where to find it, and so I set out to study the different spiritual traditions in the world. And what I mostly focused on that I liked was Buddhism and Hindu studies, and spent probably from the time I was 16 up until the time I was 20 or so, reading different books on these topics, and still had no idea where there was a Buddhist temple or where there were Buddhist teachers and so forth. In 1983, I'm from Laurel, Maryland. So I moved up to Baltimore in 1983, I think. And in that same year, I made the decision to devote myself to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And I sat under a tree by Morgan State University in Northeast Baltimore. And I made that very sincere prayer and vow. And I didn't know any Buddhists, I didn't know any temples, and didn't know any teachers. So it was just me and my books. And of course, some of my ideas were completely off, that stuff that I was coming up with on my own. And so at some point, I started attending a Theravada, and I went to Shambhala now and then, but I didn't really click completely with Shambhala. So I went to a Theravada temple down in DC for a year and a half in the mid 80s, and then met up here. A friend of mine told me about Barbara, who had a center down in Fells Point, and that's where she introduced me to Kenshin. And
What
so I
year do you
took
think that was?
that was 1987, I think. Let's see. He said to come down to TMC in DC. Was in DC at the time on 16th Street, and they're having an empowerment. So that would be my first empowerment, was the Chakra Sambhara empowerment. And at the time, I didn't recognize the significance of that. But now looking back, I think that's pretty cool. I was hoping it would be a Chenrezig Zig empowerment. And he said, oh, it's going to be a Chakra Sambhara empowerment. It's like, who's Chakra Sambhara, Yeah, so I practiced with Kenshin for a few years. Then I went to a Nyingma temple for 12 years down in Montgomery County, which was good practice and so forth. I learned a lot and studied and practiced. And then came back to the Drikung Kagyu in the early 2000s. That's where I met Lance. And so I've been practicing under Kenshin since then. I was a monk for 2 years and some change in 2010 to 2013, and gave it up, feeling discouraged at how difficult it was to be a monk all on one's own, And then recently I ordained again in August. And, I've had some doubts about it, but I think I made the right decision. I'm just sticking with the program and studying. My goal is, it's hard to be a monk just living on one's own in Baltimore without a monastery and everything. But my goal is in future lifetime to be born to where I can grow up in a monastery. And instead of, in my mind, wasting my time learning all kinds of stuff in regular school and learning, getting a job and spending my whole day in the office or spending my whole day laboring or whatever, and not have any energy at the end of the day to practice, I want to live in a monastery and practice and study all the time. So that's kind of my ambition, my aspiration, and my vow. So that brings it up to where we are now, and that's it in a nutshell.
Thank you. Does anybody have questions, comments for Tashi?
I have so many questions and comments. That was beautiful. If you
Thanks.
can indulge me just for a moment.
Sure.
Baltimore, what a beautiful city. I remember going up there to see the Orioles with my dad, my parent, my mom, and back in the 80s. And what a real town compared to Washington, D.C., where I live. But I won't get into that anymore tonight. Just want to say it's interesting. Shambhala, I think of Three Dog Night and How Does Your Light Shine? And that's what I love. But what did you mean? Can you tell us more about your experience?
There was a
Shambhala?
one of the first Western Buddhist organizations in the West, and Bernie, I think, was familiar with it more than me, was Shambhala, which was called Vajradhatu back then, which was by an organization created by Chogyam Trungpa, who was a Lama who came to England and then had a monastery in Scotland and then got married or something like that. I think he got married and came to America and founded these centers all over the place. And I liked his teachings, but I found them they're a little like idiosyncratic. I was more traditional minded. And but I used to meditate at their local Dharma center. At one point, I lived 2 blocks away, so I would just walk down the street and go there and meditate. They're the same people that do I guess it's called Shambhala Publications, and they do
It's two different people.
oh, okay. And then let's see, they what was the other?
Naropa University.
Naropa University, yeah, in Colorado, which I visited a couple times, and there's a little backstory to that. When I was 16, I hitchhiked out west, and I was in Colorado and hanging out with this dude that had a ferret or something, and we went to the University of Colorado there, and everyone's interested in his ferret and whatnot. And then we went up the street, and he said, "This is a Buddhist university here." I said, "Are you serious?" I said, "I would love to go to a Buddhist university." And at the time, it was the Naropa Institute it was 1978. It just got started shortly before that. And so anyway, I said, "Man, one day I'm going to come back here as a Buddhist." And then in, I guess, 2003, I was with a friend driving out west, and we stopped by Boulder and we visited Naropa University. I said, "This is really great. I came back as a Buddhist." At the time I first encountered it, I thought, what could be better? I almost wanted to stay there in town and just go to the, go hang out at Naropa, So maybe I should have. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, it resonates with me that we were both raised Catholic, and so I think we probably both read some Thomas Merton and understand his path from the west to the east, which I think is beautiful. And it's very dualistic of me to criticize Northern Virginia, Washington, D.C., and Baltimore. So I'll just say Baltimore is beautiful. Thank you, Tashi.
It is. When I'm being from Laurel, I wanted to move where I had public transportation and could get a job and so forth. I didn't have a car, and I thought I could go to DC. I lived there for 6 months once, but it was so expensive, and there was like drastic rich people and drastic poor people and nothing in between.
Exactly.
So Baltimore was more of a middle class, everybody's regular people and so forth. I can relate to what you're saying.
Tash, I had a question. I know actually a couple questions. I guess one question is, how can you describe simply the process you had to go through to become a monk? And then, all right, okay, I'll let you answer that one first.
Oh, okay. Basically, I had been studying with Kenshin for a long time, and I formulated the idea of being a monk on my own. And he was in Peru or something, or Chile, and I emailed him and I said, at some point I want to become a monk. And he said, "Yes, you can become a monk." And I did that, and then I gave it up, and he was not pleased, And then so then this August, like this summer, not August, but before that, this summer I started thinking, yeah, I should, reordain as a monk. And I asked him again, and he said, "Yes, please do." And so I ordained, and then I kind of had some doubts, like in November, did I do the right thing? And again, he was really not pleased. I mean, he made it perfectly clear to me that he wants me to be a monk. So I'm kind of reluctant in a sense. It would be easier I would really rather be in a monastery. It's kind of, I'm walking around Baltimore in robes. Not everybody knows what they are, but every week I meet people who ask me about Dharma. Just this morning at the grocery store, I was picking up a bottle of iced tea, and the cashier at the self checkout thing, whatever, she's not a cashier, but whatever, the monitor of the self checkout kiosk, said, "Are you a monk?" I said, "Yes." And she's taking nutrition courses and studying Ayurvedic stuff and whatnot. And we talked, and I gave her my number, if she has any questions. So I'm always, it's like Kenshin knows, I'm gonna say this, and I really mean this, but a lama, a great master like Kenshin or other great lamas, they know better than an ordinary person what's going on and what's good for a person and what works. If it was just left up to me, I would screw everything up, I think. you know so I'm glad to have that kind of guidance and support like that from the Lama.
Thank you. And then my other question is, what is your day? That's you touched on a little bit. You say you wear your monk's robes everywhere, but
Yes.
are you what else do you have a regular job, or you're able to support yourself? How do you support yourself as a monk?
I'm on Social Security. I've been on Social Security disability since the mid 90s, and I have a part-time job for extra, a little extra cash to buy books and different things and do things, and so that's how I get by. I don't have to work full time. I work, till about 12 noon or something, and then come home. I rest a little in the afternoon. The rest of the day is spent studying and practicing.
Tashi, I have a question, and that is the Vinaya vows. We talk
Yes.
about, in the Hinayana, we learned that there's discipline, was the first teaching of the Buddha, and that
Yeah.
it was expressed in the Vinaya vows. And that's
Mhm.
part of the vows that a monk takes, regardless of what school they happen to be in or anything like that. Could you expound on those vows a little bit, and
Yes.
maybe how they've helped you, and have they been an obstacle for you in any way?
Okay. The vows as a novice monk, because I'm a novice, I only have 10 vows. So it's the 5 same vows as a layperson, except for celibacy. And then there's other vows like not listening to music or dancing or singing, not wearing perfume or ornaments, not handling money, which I'll get to in a minute, not eating after noon, which I'm diabetic, so I'm already, I don't have to worry about that. I can eat when I need to. And then let's see, what's the other one? There's another one I can't remember. So these vows are not too hard to keep once you get used to them. I think that the vows that have helped me most is the vows of celibacy, which keep me from getting in trouble, running around doing this or that, And then also the vow of, this is going to sound kind of corny perhaps, but the vow of not listening to music. Now, I've always liked listening to music. I'm not a musician. I can't play instruments to save my life, but I always like listening, And now I only listen if someone else is playing music that I'm with. Like if I'm in a friend's car or something and he's playing the radio, I don't tell him to turn it off. It's music's playing, it's fun. But on my own time, I don't. And it's really freed me up because I used to spend several hours a day doing that, and it kind of pulled my mind away into worldly thoughts and stuff, like, I might start thinking about Patty Boyd, or I might start thinking about smoking weed or something, whatever, just the stuff I used to do when I was younger and listen to music. So that's helped me a lot, I would say. Yeah.
Has it been an obstacle to you in any way?
Not so far. I can keep the vows, except okay, there was one vow that was an obstacle to me, which, like I mentioned, because I'm diabetic, I now don't have to worry about, which was trying to eat everything by noon. And back in 2010 and 2011, 12, and 13, I did that, and I had about a 50% success rate, and I was starving in the evening, and I couldn't imagine living that way. It was difficult for me. And since then I became diabetic. So now if I have to eat, if my sugar gets low, I've got to eat something. So it's a medical necessity, which the Buddha actually allowed. If you have a medical necessity, you can eat. Also, the Buddha taught, people don't always know this, but the Buddha taught that certain exceptions to how the vows are carried out. Like if you're in a land that there's a famine and someone offers you food at 6 p.m., you can eat that food because there's a scarcity at that time. Things like that. If there's a medical necessity, you can do that. I think, and again, I'll say, I think the vows are easier to keep in a monastic setting where other people are keeping the same vows and everybody knows what they are. The full monks have 253 vows or so, and they're very, a lot of them have to do with decorum, interestingly, but that was considered important. There's monks' vows not to cross your legs, or not to, when you're sitting, not lotus posture, but just have your legs sticking out and crossed. You're not supposed to do that. It has some kind of energetic imprint or something. It's better not to do that. And that's just one example of one of the more arcane vows. Also, when the Buddha was getting ready to enter parinirvana, he told Ananda that some of the less important vows can be dispensed with. But Ananda didn't ask him which vows those were. So the Buddha went into parinirvana, and we never knew which vows. But we know it's not the main vows. It's just the more minor vows.
Is the title of the novice monk, is that the Getsul?
Yes, Tibetan, yeah.
Getsul?
Yes.
And then
Yes.
a fully ordained. So the next step would be a fully ordained monk. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
That's a bhikshu.
Yes.
That's a bhikshu would be fully ordained. So
Or in Tibetan, a gelong.
I beg pardon?
In Tibetan, a bhikshu is a gelong.
Oh, the bhikshu is a Sanskrit name.
Yes. Yes.
Ah, so I Gelong. Right.
Gelong in Tibetan, yeah.
That I didn't.
And the novice, I'm trying to think what the novice is in Sanskrit. I can't remember what it is. It's not Shramana. Shramanika. Maybe Shramanika or something. Yeah. Shramanera. Yeah. Thanks, Bernie. Yeah.
Tashi, I had another question. How do you get around the prohibition against handling money?
My only solution to that is that I spend money on necessities and dharma. I don't spend money on stuff I don't need or that's not dharma. And that's my best I can do for that. Yeah. But I will say too, for monk, I lead kind of a luxurious life. I like to burn incense, so I buy incense, and I've got my books, and that's important to buy books, so I've got that and things I need, like an alarm clock and this, that, and the other, but yeah, I only spend on necessities and dharma. And again, in a monastery, it would not be necessary to worry about that because they'd be feeding you, and you'd be set up there. You're thinking of becoming a monk, right? Or you are becoming a monk, right?
Well, it's for our temple, it's called a teaching monk, and it's not, it's a householder role. So, we're following the precepts that, we're following the 10 Bodhisattva precepts already. And I'm actually, working with my teacher to figure out, because our temple, is kind of creating its own traditions, is what would be an appropriate tradition as far as vows. And I really like the 37 Bodhisattva vows, and I'm trying to think about utilizing that as the ordination vows. I feel like those are vows that I can I can uphold as a, as a secular, as a householder, that I couldn't, some of the other ones that you're talking about, it would, that would be difficult for me to hold with a 40-hour-a-week job and, a family.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So we don't have much time, but I would just like to say that Tashi has been a wonderful friend to me, and I know
Thank you.
to many others. He's very, very, very generous, and offering books and offering other ritual items and so on, plus his time and experiences and so on. So he's been a great friend to many people, and I think that's I don't know whether that's part of being a monk, or I think it's just being part of who Tashi is. And I think maybe it's a little bit of both. But thank you very much for all
you,
your
Lance.
generosity for everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hey Tashi, do you come to Noble Film Night?
What's that again?
You come to Noble Film Night?
No, I have a monastic group on Friday night that I attend.
Would you watch a Noble film?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
He's seen most of them anyway. We've been doing this for almost 20 years.
Yeah. But yeah, I might come in for the second half of Noble Film Night. Yeah, I could do that. As a monk, you can watch Dharma films anytime. That's not necessarily something like an R-rated movie or something or whatever. Yeah.
So, and then the music, you don't listen even to like instrumental, like chimes or anything like that?
The only music I really listen to is mantra chanting and that sort of thing.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. Sure.
Any other questions for Tashi?
I have a lot of questions, but we have 2 minutes left, so I'll talk to Tashi later.
Okay, sounds good. Anytime. I'm always willing to talk.
Yeah, everybody's available on WhatsApp. You don't have to go through our channel, our WhatsApp group. If you look in the your contacts and your WhatsApp contacts, everybody's there individually, so you can make a one-on-one conversation with anybody that's in our group.
You can also use cell phone text messaging, Lance.
You can do that too.
I love hearing from the bodhisattvas of the group. So thank you, Lance. This is very
Well, you're
engaging.
welcome. Thank you.
I love seeing students practicing Dharma. It's a blessing, it's really great. I mean, all the effort everyone's putting in and time and really it's wonderful to see. Yeah.
I just want to say thank you to all of you. Yeah, it's a strange time, but this has just been a very nice couple of hours just listening
Well, very
to the
good.
Dharma and listening to you guys and learning more about you. So thanks.
And if anybody has time and you're doing a practice, and if you can recite Om Mani Padme Hum, the Mani mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum Shri, if you can recite that from your heart going out to all beings, and particularly beings that are in the bardo, and Debbie's mother, as I said, just passed away. So being able to send her that Avalokiteshvara, pure light of compassion, is a magnificent thing to be able to do. So whether it's 10 recitations or 108 from a whole mile around or more than that, that's a wonderful offering to make for Debbie's mother and all the other beings that are in the bardo.
Thank you. Her name is Anne.
Debbie, when did your
Thank you.
class?
Thursday. Yeah, it was. She started to go really fast on Wednesday, and we just stayed with her.
Mm-hmm.
And we were at the hospital, but it was very peaceful, and she had her daughters around, so we gave her the best. And did, I did Pala, did Amitabha, Amitayas, and just helped her through the transition.
Very good.
Thank you.
What's her last name?
Oh, Connor, like me.
Oh,
Conner, Connor.
Right. All right, well, very good. Thank you all very much. And Tashi, would you do the dedication prayer for tonight? Can you do on page 36, the Lord Jigdan Sumgun? Oh, you don't have this book.
I don't have that. No.
It's the
I
Lord
have-
Jigdan Sumgun prayer.
Yeah, I got it. I got to find where. Oh yeah, let me get it. Okay.
Lance, is there a website that I can go to look at all the vows that they have to take at different levels, like a general website?
I don't know of one. Maybe Tashi does. I don't know.
I think, maybe Buddha Weekly might have something on that.
Okay,
Buddha
I'll
Weekly.
check.
Huh? Okay.
I'll text you later. It's 9 o'clock. I didn't want to delay the closing praise. I can text you in a moment.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, I'll read the dedication prayer by Jigdan Sumgun.
Thank you.
Glorious, holy, venerable, precious, kind, root, and lineage lamas. Divine assembly of yidams and assemblies of Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, Yogins, Yoginis, and Dakinis dwelling in the 10 directions. Please hear my prayer. May the virtues collected in the 3 times by myself and all sentient beings in samsara and nirvana, and the innate root of virtue, not result in the 8 worldly concerns, the 4 causes of samsara, or rebirth as a Shravaka or Pratyeka Buddha. May all mother sentient beings, especially those enemies who hate me and mine, obstructors who harm, misleading Maras and the hordes of demons, experience happiness, be separated from suffering, and swiftly attain unsurpassed, perfect, complete, and precious Buddhahood. By the power of this vast root of virtue, may I benefit all beings through my body, speech, and mind. May the afflictions of desire, hatred, ignorance, arrogance, and jealousy not arise in my mind. May attachment to fame, reputation, wealth, honor, and concern for this life not arise for even a moment. May my mind stream be moistened by loving kindness, compassion, and bodhicitta, and through that may I become a spiritual master with good qualities equal to the infinity of space. May I gain the supreme attainment of Mahamudra in this very life. May the torment of suffering not arise even at the time of my death. May I not die with negative thoughts. May I not die confused by wrong view. May I not experience an untimely death. May I die joyfully and happily in the great luminosity of the mind is such, and the pervading clarity of Dharmata. May I, in any case, gain the supreme attainment of Mahamudra at the time of death or in the bardo.
Om. Ah.
Om.
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 Ah. Om.
Om.
Om. Ah. Om. May my body, speech, and mind become inseparable with the body, speech, and mind of all the enlightened ones for the benefit of all sentient beings. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you, Les.
Good night, everyone.
All right,
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good
Hi,
night.
everyone. Thank you.
All right. We'll be praying for you, Debbie.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everybody. Thank
It was
you.
good to see you, Lance, on a Sunday.
Beg your pardon?
It was great to see you on Sunday.
Oh, yes, yes. I'm sorry we didn't get to talk more, but I had to go.
Yeah, I noticed that. And there was some, we were throwing some